Marc Márquez was about to turn a race that should have been over into an impossible comeback, and then watch it collapse in one violent moment. But before the mistake, the gravel, and the desperate charge back through the field, there was a battle for control. 25 laps waited under the punishing heat of Jerez, where the smallest error could destroy an entire afternoon. When the lights went out, the grid exploded toward turn 1. Maverick Viñales arrived too fast and drifted wider than he wanted, but somehow pulled the Yamaha back into line and protected his position through the opening corners. It was a narrow escape, and directly behind him, Marquez was already closing. The race had barely begun, yet the Honda was filling Viñales' mirrors, attacking every piece of open asphalt and refusing to give the leader a single moment to breathe. In conditions this hot, waiting behind another rider carried its own danger. The disturbed air from the bike ahead could raise the temperature of the front tire, reducing the grip Marquez needed under braking and through the fastest corners. The longer he stayed behind Viñales, the more difficult the attack could become. Marquez understood that patience might cost him control of the race, so he began searching for a way through almost immediately. He followed the Yamaha through every change of direction, studied the exits, and remained close enough to strike the instant a gap appeared. The pressure was constant. Viñales could not focus only on the road ahead, because Marquez was now a threat in every braking zone. Then the opening came. Marquez committed to the inside and fired the Honda toward the position, carrying enough speed to force the issue before Viñales could close the door. It was late, aggressive, and unmistakably Marquez. But Viñales did not surrender. Instead of allowing the Honda to disappear, he responded immediately and dragged Marquez back into the fight. The Yamaha rider had often been questioned about how he reacted when another rider broke his rhythm, but this time he refused to back down. He stayed close, attacked again, and turned the opening laps into a confrontation between two riders with everything to prove. Viñales needed to show that pressure would not break him. Marquez needed to seize control before the heat, the tires, or another rival took the opportunity away. Every braking zone became more dangerous. Every wide line opened a door. Every attack forced the next one to be even more aggressive. And as Marquez continued pushing the Honda closer to its limit, one question began to hang over Jerez. Was he taking control of the race, or beginning a chain of events that even his extraordinary talent would not be able to stop? For the opening laps, Marc Márquez had the speed to control the race, but Maverick Viñales was making sure he would never feel comfortable. Every time Marquez tried to build momentum, the Yamaha stayed close enough to threaten him again. Viñales was not simply defending a position. He was answering a question that had followed him for years. What would happen when another rider forced him into a physical, aggressive fight? This time, he did not allow the pressure to break his rhythm. He kept the Yamaha within striking distance, looked for a way back through, and forced Marquez to protect every braking zone. With the riders using the same tire options, there was no obvious advantage waiting to rescue either of them. The difference would come from commitment, precision, and the willingness to risk more than the man beside them. Viñales considered an attack under braking, but the space disappeared before he could complete it. Marquez held the position, yet the Honda was already beginning to move underneath him. The rear stepped sideways. The bike looked unsettled. And for the first time, the fight was no longer only between Marquez and Viñales. Marquez was also fighting the machine beneath him. The warning came through the final corner. Marquez entered with the Honda sliding so violently that it looked less like a controlled racing line and more like a motorcycle being dragged back from the edge. He somehow kept it upright, but the save did not end the danger. Moments later, the mistake arrived. The Honda ran beyond the limit of the track and carried Marquez into the dirt, where the bike appeared certain to fall. The tires lost the clean grip of the asphalt. The machine leaned farther and farther. For a moment, it seemed the race was over. But Marquez refused to release it. He held the motorcycle against the slide, kept his body underneath it, and somehow forced the Honda back onto its wheels. It was the kind of save that only delayed the consequences rather than erasing them. He had avoided the crash, but the entire field had rushed past while he fought to regain control. A battle for the lead had become a desperate attempt to remain in the race. He had saved the motorcycle. He had lost almost everything else. Now the challenge was completely different. Marquez was no longer measuring himself against one rider at the front. He was surrounded by motorcycles, dirty air, unstable tires, and competitors who had no reason to make his recovery easy. Every position would have to be taken back under braking, and every pass carried the risk of turning the earlier escape into a real crash. Ahead, Fabio Quartararo was beginning to show the kind of intelligence that separates a fast rider from a complete one. When he attacked Jack Miller, he did not simply throw the Yamaha into the corner and hope it stayed there. He reached the apex in a way that blocked Miller from using the Ducati's acceleration, preventing him from opening the throttle early and fighting back on the exit. It was a small tactical detail, but it showed how the race was changing. Some riders were beginning to think several corners ahead. Marquez, trapped deeper in the field, did not have that luxury. He needed positions immediately. He attacked late, forced his Honda into narrowing gaps, and came dangerously close to contact. Each move brought him one step closer to the front, but each one also demanded more from a bike that had already warned him once. Even Viñales, still carrying real speed, was beginning to feel how little margin remained. Under braking, the rear of the Yamaha stepped around and pushed the bike toward the edge of control. Once the motorcycle reached that point, the safest option was no longer to turn harder. The rider had to release some pressure from the front brake, allow the machine to recover, and accept that the corner might already be lost. Viñales ran straight on, turning a potential disaster into another escape, but the message was becoming impossible to ignore. The heat, the braking forces, and the constant aggression were pulling the race apart. Marquez had survived the biggest moment so far, yet survival alone would not satisfy him. He had started the day fighting for control at the front. Now he was buried in traffic, with every rider ahead becoming another obstacle and every lap disappearing faster than the last. The comeback had begun, but to reach the leaders again, Marquez would have to ride even closer to the limit that had nearly ended his race. Marc Márquez was not recovering positions because the Honda suddenly became the fastest bike on the track. He was recovering them because he understood exactly where the riders ahead were most vulnerable. By this stage of the race, the tires had already completed most of their working life. The motorcycles were moving under acceleration, sliding under braking, and becoming less predictable every time the riders changed direction. Marquez used that instability as an opportunity. Instead of waiting for a perfect opening, he attacked before the rider ahead had time to prepare. Morbidelli was caught under braking. Pol Espargaro faced the same pressure. Then came Dovizioso and Miller. The names changed, but the pattern remained almost identical. Marquez stayed hidden behind the bike ahead, moved toward the inside at the final moment, and forced his opponent to react when it was already too late. In simple terms, Marquez was turning every braking zone into a test of courage. The rider in front had to choose between closing the inside line early or following the normal racing line to protect speed through the corner. Closing the door could prevent the pass, but it could also ruin the exit. Leaving the smallest gap allowed Marquez to send the Honda inside. His opponents were not simply defending against a faster motorcycle. They were defending against a rider willing to brake later, release the brakes deeper into the turn, and accept a level of instability that many others would avoid. That is why several of the passes looked so sudden. The riders ahead could not see exactly when Marquez would attack, and by the time they heard the Honda beside them, the position was already disappearing. But there is one detail almost everyone is missing. Every successful pass made the comeback more impressive, but it also made the next attack more dangerous. Marquez was gaining positions without giving the tires or the motorcycle much time to recover. Late braking loads the front tire heavily. Hard acceleration stresses the rear. Repeating that process through traffic can make the bike increasingly difficult to control, especially late in a hot race. From a racing perspective, his precision was extraordinary. Yet the Honda had already shown signs of instability earlier. The rear had moved underneath him. The bike had nearly escaped his control. One possible explanation is that Marquez believed the shrinking number of laps left him no choice but to keep attacking at the same intensity. He was winning the battle against the riders ahead, but the margin between control and disaster was becoming smaller with every move. This could mean that the most important part of the comeback was not the number of riders Marquez passed. It was the amount of risk he had to accept to pass them so quickly. His charge was changing the race because the riders near the front could no longer focus only on Quartararo or Viñales. Marquez was arriving from behind at a pace that forced everyone to reconsider their braking points and defensive lines. If he maintained that rhythm, a challenge for the leading group no longer looked impossible. But there was another possibility. The same aggression that had brought him back into contention could eventually demand more grip than the Honda had left to give. Marquez was closing in on the front, yet the next few laps would reveal whether this was the beginning of one of MotoGP's greatest recoveries, or whether he had already borrowed more from the bike than it could repay. With 4 laps remaining, Marc Márquez had transformed a ruined race into something almost impossible. He had recovered from the back of the field, carved through experienced rivals, and placed himself directly behind Maverick Viñales. The podium was suddenly within reach, but the warning signs were becoming impossible to ignore. The Honda was moving under him even before the corners began. The rear looked unstable. Every time Marquez asked for more acceleration, the motorcycle appeared to answer with less control. He had recovered the positions, but the bike no longer looked capable of giving him many more chances. Then, at turn 3, the comeback ended. Marquez opened the throttle. The rear tire broke loose. The Honda snapped sideways and launched him into the air before throwing both rider and machine toward the gravel. There was no time to save it. No miraculous recovery. No second opportunity. After spending lap after lap dragging himself back toward the front, everything disappeared in a fraction of a second. The same aggression that had made the charge possible had carried him to a point where one loss of grip was enough to erase the entire fight. At the front, Fabio Quartararo was writing a completely different ending. While Marquez's race collapsed, the young French rider remained in control and crossed the line to claim his first MotoGP victory. Viñales secured second, with Andrea Dovizioso completing the podium. For Quartararo, it was more than a win. It was proof that he could turn raw speed into control when the pressure was at its highest. For Marquez and Honda, the consequences were far more serious. A race that had begun as a fight for victory ended with the reigning champion in the gravel, and the direction of the season suddenly uncertain. The real question begins now. Was Marquez's charge an extraordinary display of talent, or evidence that he was demanding more from himself and the Honda than either could safely deliver? His pace showed that almost no position was beyond recovery, but his crash showed that even the greatest riders cannot negotiate with the limit forever. Quartararo left Jerez as a new MotoGP winner. Marquez left behind a question that would follow the championship long after the checkered flag. Was this brilliant racing taken one step too far? Or was Marquez right to keep attacking while the podium remained possible? Share your opinion in the comments and subscribe to Velocity Wars for more MotoGP stories told like battles.